Hello everyone, my name is Dakoba and welcome back to Satisfactory. Today we're going to be building this heavy modular frame factory in a town style using vehicle-based logistics. Now this is a 100% efficient factory, and if you have any questions about how we're doing it, stay tuned because we're going to go through it. If you're looking for something specific, there are timestamps in the description below, but otherwise strap yourself in and let's get into it. We are here outside of our brand new computer factory, and it is working great. We're getting all the computers we'll ever need. I'm very happy with it. Now, our goal for today is going to be to dive into heavy modular frame production. At the end of our last episode, we unlocked our monorail train technology milestone, and I'm very excited to get into trains, but as I started to look at them, I realized that we really need a heavy modular frame factory before that's reasonable, and that is a big enough build that it warrants an episode all on its own. So that is our main goal for today. Now, before we get into that, though, we have to set up some basic infrastructure, in particular, power. A heavy modular frame factory is a big build and it takes a ton of power. The design I have in mind is relatively simple. It produces 4 heavy modular frames per minute and it will require a bit over a gigawatt of power. So we are going to have to build an additional power plant to get ready for that. Now I've chosen to use the oil nodes in the North Sea for that. There are many oil nodes up there and we're going to tap a couple of them in order to build a simple fuel power plant. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics of this build. I recently put out a guide, which is this exact build. So go ahead and take a look at that if you're curious about it. There's a link to it in the description down below. So we're just going to jump straight into a time lapse to knock out this power plant quickly, and then we'll get over and talk about our heavy modular frame factory. All right, and with our power plant out of the way, let's head on over to the site of our heavy modular frame factory and take a look at it. All right, now taking a look at the heavy modular frame recipe, in order to make 2 heavy modular frames per minute, we're going to need a total of 10 modular frames, 30 steel pipes, 10 encased industrial beams, and 200 screws, and we're wanting to double that. That should give us 4 heavy modular frames per minute, which will be plenty for us to build with, as well as giving us the opportunity to sort of siphon some of those off later on to use in a production line. Now the good news is, like our computer factory, this has a pretty minimal ingredient set. The modular frames can be crafted purely from iron, steel pipes introduce coal into that along with the iron, and encased industrial beams add in concrete. Screws again are just made from iron. So what we have here is a 3-ingredient factory that uses a bunch of iron, a little bit of coal, and a little bit of concrete. Now I've been working out the specific numbers and ratios we're going to need, and it turns out we're going to need 780 iron ore, 200 coal, and 300 limestone, and that will give us our 4 heavy modular frames. Now, the good news is we have a plan for what this factory is going to look like. We're going to take our 760 iron ore, turn 200 of it into ingots, and combine it with 200 coal to make our 300 steel ingots. The rest will turn into iron ingots and send into constructors to make 120 iron rods, 180 iron plates, and 760 screws. We'll combine the iron plates and screws to make reinforced industrial plates, and then we'll combine those with our iron rods to make 20 modular frames. We'll take our steel ingots and turn that into 200 steel pipes, and then we'll also take our limestone, turn it into 100 concrete, and combine that with the steel pipes to make our encased industrial beams using the encased industrial pipes alternate recipe. We'll combine the encased industrial beams, the pipes, the modular frames, and the screws in order to make our reinforced modular frames. Now, before we get into the build, I've gotten some questions about how I do my time lapses, and I want to give you guys a hint into sort of my process for that. The first thing I do is I go ahead and I lay out the factory using the machines, and you can see that I've done that here with our heavy modular frame factory. You can also see that this is a different style factory than we've seen before, and we'll go through that here in a few minutes. But I want to highlight that this is one of my preliminary steps. This is how I get the layouts for the factory and make sure I have enough components before I go into the time-lapse build. Now with that out of the way, let's get into it. Our first step is to craft up some concrete. We use 8 constructors to turn 300 limestone into 100 concrete per minute. Next, we mine and smelt 200 iron into ingots and send it to foundries, along with some coal we bring in via truck line to turn into 300 steel ingots using the solid steel ingot alternate recipe. The steel is then sent into another small factory containing 10 constructors to turn it into 200 steel pipes per minute. We ship the steel pipes and concrete into an assembler plant to craft our encased industrial beams using the encased industrial pipes alternate recipe. Use a load balancer to separate a few steel pipes in our encased industrial beams and load them into a truck station for shipping to our manufacturer. In a new factory, we mine and smelt 100 iron into ingots and then send it into constructors to be crafted into 400 screws per minute. These are then loaded for shipping as well. Our last component factory takes 480 iron per minute and crafts it into 120 iron rods, 180 iron plates, and 360 screws per minute. The screws and plates are crafted into 30 reinforced iron plates per minute, which are combined with the iron rods to craft 20 modular frames. In this factory, we overclock several machines to fit the factory into a smaller area at the cost of additional power. This was an aesthetic choice. We have plenty of power from our new fuel power station, and the smaller form factor keeps our buildings to all be about the same size, which leads to a much more natural and organic look to our town. Finally, everything is shipped to a manufacturer for final assembly into 4 heavy modular frames per minute. We're going to be using about half of these for making space elevator parts, so I think 4 is about the minimum you can really finish the game with. To provide logistics, we use a single truck line through the entire factory. We start by loading coal and refueling the truck, and then sending it to each component factory in turn. At each of our small sub-factories, we load the crafted components into a truck station for shipping down the line. When the truck reaches a new factory, everything is unloaded. Parts that are needed are sent into a production line, while parts that aren't used at that station are separated with a smart splitter and sent into the output truck station to be loaded back onto the truck. When all is said and done, the factory mines exactly as much ore as is needed for all of its component parts, and every machine is perfectly tuned such that none are ever idle. Efficiency never looked so good. And that is a heavy modular frame factory all complete. You can see our vehicles moving about, our factories cranking away, and at the end of the line we have some heavy modular frames going into storage for us to use in the coming days for milestones and space elevator parts. Now, before we move on to our next project, I wanted to take a minute to talk about a couple of the mechanics we encountered in this build. First of all, I want to address the style of build it is, and that's what I call a town style, where we have many small factories. Each one is either single purpose or very nearly, and they're just sort of strewn about in a very organic sort of fashion. The goal of this is for this to look like a natural sort of outpost that might spring up in a real world scenario, and I think that this does a very effective job of that. One of the things I like best about this style of building is how well it scales. This can be expanded to almost any size factory, making almost any product in the game. No matter how big or small the project is, you can divide it down into single purpose factories, build a whole bunch of them, and then connect them with vehicle logistics. And one of the things I like best about this is how it looks when you scale it up to massive sizes. So for example, if we consider one of the space elevator parts that's available right now that uses heavy modular frames as well as computers, circuit boards, and plastic, we could build a computer factory in this same style right next door, and it would start to look like a proper small city that's just sort of rising up out of the desert. And if we were to do a couple more factories nearby, then that could expand to fill an entire biome, and that's actually one of the long-term projects I have envisioned for this series in the distant future. One of the other things you can do with it is actually go ahead and just build your big buildings in this way and have, just like we have our computer factory and our advanced steel factory in these sort of large skyscrapers, we could build all of those factories in the same sort of natural way and then connect them up with logistics lines along the ground. And that's something we're going to be taking a look at in our next episode with trains. But when you then combine it with a bunch of smaller factories like this, then you start to see what takes on the appearance of an actual organic city, and it looks really nice. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is how we use truck stations in the situation where we are moving products we don't necessarily want to move. So, for example, our very first stop in this factory up on the hill there is to make a bunch of concrete, but we don't use that concrete until our fourth stop down here at the encased industrial beam factory. Now, truck stations have the disadvantage that they unload everything when a truck pulls in. And so this first truck station where we're unloading coal is actually also unloading the concrete. And that's why we have this smart splitter with a connection directly into our second factory so that we can channel that concrete forward. Now, what this means is that the concrete has additional latency, as an additional delay of sort of one truck lap before it arrives at its destination. But once the trucks had been running for a few minutes and we had a couple of those laps taken care of, then we don't see any impact to the throughput or the total number of items being delivered over time to our later factories down the line. Now, before we move on to our next project, I do want to send off a couple of milestones because those are things that we'll be able to make use of in the very near future. The first one we're going to take a look at is the alternative fluid transport milestone, which allows us to take fluids and convert them into an item that we can put in our inventory in order to move around. Now, this has a couple of important uses. Obviously, the ability to move fluid without using a pipeline is significant, especially if we're trying to move it vertically, where we would have to have pumps to provide head lift. Instead, we can package it and place it on a conveyor lift, which just sort of works. So that's one thing. The big thing I'm excited about, though, is this packaged fuel, and that is a requirement for one of our next milestones that we're going to unlock, which is the Jetpack. So one of the things we're going to be doing today is going over and building a simple fluid packager. Now let's go ahead and send off our alternative fluid transport milestone. All right, and with that milestone sent away, we are going to head on over to our fuel power plant where we're going to siphon off a little bit of fuel and set up a simple packaging setup that'll give us all the jet fuel we need in order to unlock the jetpack, as well as make use of it in future build projects. All right, now in order to make a small packaged fuel setup, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have a single water extractor that will feed water into a refinery. We're going to combine that with the polymer resin that's being produced at our various fuel refineries that we will then send a conveyor line down this way. Now, previously we had an awesome sink at the far end, so I'm going to have to reverse that conveyor line and bring it this way, bring it over these pipes and into this refinery. Now that will give us the ability to make plastic. We're then going to set up a constructor that'll turn that plastic into fluid packaging, which we will then send into a packager along with some fuel that will tap off of our main line to create our packaged fuel. Now this is going to go into a storage unit so that we have easy access to it whenever we want, but we're also going to set up an awesome sink just to make sure that nothing ever backs up. Let's get into it. All right, and that is a fuel packaging setup all complete. In addition to the build that we talked about before, I did make a couple of additional modifications. First of all, we have an elevated pipeline for our fuel. That's simply to prioritize the power plants over the fuel packager. We've removed one of our power plants, so we should have just a bit of excess fuel that's being produced, and that will eventually back up and create enough pressure to travel down this line. But it means that the power plants will use fuel first, and so we'll only package anything that we get in excess. Second, I did have to add another back conveyor around to the Awesome Sink because we were producing more polymer resin than we can handle with one refinery, but we certainly don't need any more plastic than that. You can see that our plastic containers have already backed up and we're just sinking any of the plastic that we make now already. So that took care of that problem. All right, and with our first couple stacks of fuel starting to build up, let's go ahead and grab one of those and head on back home to see what we can do for another milestone. All right, and we are back here at the hub, and we are all squared away to send away our Jetpack milestone. Let's go ahead and get this in the air and take a look at what the Jetpack requires. Alright, now the Jetpack takes a bit of plastic, rubber, some circuit boards, and some motors. Fortunately, we have all of those on hand. I did have to pop back over to our plastic refinery to pick up a bit more plastic because I had run out crafting the circuit boards for us, but we are squared away, so let's go ahead and craft up a Jetpack and take a look. Alright, this occupies the same space as our Blade Runners, and I believe, yep, if we hold down jump, we can now fly through the world. And can't fly for very long, but that's alright. And this is going to make getting around and exploring much easier, and we have a great deal of exploring to do. Tiers 5 and 6 unlock the largest number of alternate recipes in the game, and some of those, particularly some of those around fuel processing, are tremendously valuable, and we're going to want to fly all around the map and gather up hard drives in order to do that. So that's something I'm going to do between episodes, because we're not going to need those recipes for a little bit. Our next episode is going to be focused on trains, and we're going to establish a main logistics line connecting up all of the different sort of sections that we've created around the map using trains. Our main base, our advanced steel and computer factory, our brand new heavy modular frame factory, and our fixedness factory are all going to be connected up in the next episode. We're also going to talk about how we can use train-based logistics effectively to make it easy to set up outpost factories all around the map, as well as do a basic overview of signaling. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that as much as I am. That is going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Leave a like if you have, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. My name is Ben Dakoba, and I'll see you soon. Have an efficient day.